I was a film goer from childhood. I had 3 neighborhood theaters within a mile of each other when I grew up in Baltimore, and the feature changed every 2 or 3 days, and my family didn't travel much, and what did I have to do to see the world? So that's how I started going to the movies, and I never lost interest.
The Legion of Decency was founded by the bishops of the United States in November of 1933. It was in response to a sense that I believe was fairly widespread that certain things were deteriorating in the movies. One of them was the exploitation of sexual material. But there was also concern about the presentation of gangsters and crime stories. Beginning with Prohibition, gangsterism had become extremely widespread, extremely violent, the Al Capone sort of thing. And there was concern that the films were glorifying gangsters, so there was a sense that somebody needed to be doing something about cleaning up the movies. And rather than government censorship, it was felt that an organizational effort to exert basically economic influence on the content of film would be helpful. Now, in the background here, there had already been a production code established by the forerunner of the Motion Picture Association of America, but the code was really not being enforced. And so the hope was that if the Legion were present and were able to say, you're going to lose a significant portion of your patronage, that is, the Catholic population are going to obey their bishops and stay away from not only bad movies, but perhaps boycott theaters that show movies that violate the code, then you're going to take a hit at the box office. And that indeed was exactly what happened, was that the bishops managed to show in a very short time that they had command of the faithful. The faithful would obey them and not go to certain movies or not even go to a movie theater for 6 months that had shown a film that contravened the production code. As soon as that happened, then Hollywood sat up and took notice. And this brought on the enforcement of the production code, which had already existed. But now, in response to the pressure brought by the Legion, it began to be enforced in a serious way.
I grew up really with the Legion of Decency because on the first Sunday after the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, the priest would ask us all to stand and take the Legion of Decency pledge.
Your membership in the Legion consisted of your annual repetition of the oath, where you promised to avoid films that were condemned by the Legion and promised to support wholesome films, basically. Now, taking the oath was voluntary, but it was done at Mass, and the priest would have you stand up and raise your hand. So I presume that if you refused to do that, you would be somewhat conspicuous.
As a kid, I had subscribed to the Legion of Decency newsletter. It came by monthly on a big white sheet of paper with just the title of the film and the ratings. And for $3 a year, I would get this every 2 weeks.
From the time of the establishment of the Legion and the beginning of the enforcement of the Code Office, also known as the Hayes Office, would be involved in production pretty much from the writing of the script on. And they would say, this violates the production code, that's not allowed, or you're going to have trouble getting that by the Legion. After that, an early cut of the film would be shown to the Legion, and they would indicate how they would classify it. And if there was fear that the film was going to be classified C for condemned, which meant that Catholics should stay away, then appropriate edits would be made to the film in order to get it to pass muster with the Legion. So in those days, they were looking at the film before it even came out and saying, you know, these are the changes you have to make. And effectively, for at least the first 15 years of the Legion, Virtually no Hollywood film that was condemned by the Legion made a profit. That was how much it would cut into box office receipts to have the C classification.
Once the National Legion of Decency proved to Hollywood filmmakers it could impact them where it really hurt by cutting profits at the box office, the leaders of the organization were given an influential role in content development.
There was cooperation between the National Legion of Decency and certain important figures within Hollywood who saw that censorship by the government or boycotts were going to be bad for the industry.
No exhibitor would want to release a C-rated movie. Breen would get the script and then look at it and say, these lines are sex suggestive. That was one of his famous phrases.
It was really about sexuality, but negotiating with the industry, they needed something that was very yes or no. If there was no nudity, then the sexuality wasn't such a big deal. If the sexuality wasn't a big deal, but there was a moment of nudity, it suddenly became a big deal.
Anytime you got nothing to do and lots of time to do it, why, come on.
They claimed that the Legion was established because moviegoers were very offended by Mae West's, which I don't really believe. I mean, Mae West was suggestive, but risque, you might say. She was never dirty or anything like that. But it is true, if you look at the pre-code movies, first of all, the cleavage was rather obvious. The loose living was rather obvious. They showed the seamy side of life, but, I mean, nobody had to pay for what they did.
I remember Pat Sullivan reporting back to us reviewers with some satisfaction that he had met with the producers of Bonnie and Clyde and given them the ultimatum. There was a scene at the top of the stairs, Bonnie at the top of the stairs, and you could very briefly see her bare breast. And he gave them an ultimatum that we were going to have to condemn this movie. So they clipped 10 seconds from the movie, and now they could give it in A4. Then the issue, of course, was violence. Was violence too much? But violence didn't have the same negative reaction from reviewers and consultants that sex did. Besides being in a negotiating position with the studios, the Catholic office was kind of beginning, in some sense, to educate the public. Now, the process they used for doing the ratings was important. They would have a half a dozen reviewers, and they would have another 20 or 30 consultants. And the way it worked was the studio, a few weeks before the movie's release, would have critic screenings, and they would have special critic screenings for the Catholic office in a preview theater. We would all go to the preview movie, then the consultants would go back to Brooklyn or Queens or wherever they lived, and New Jersey, and they would send in their comments and reviews.
Often with the screening, we'd come right back and sit down and talk about it before we even got the consultants' reports in.
None of us knew what the rating was going to be. I think Henry Herx put everything together, and then on the basis of that, the rating was assigned.
The Legion couldn't impose the pain of sin on you for seeing a condemned film. You might have a legitimate reason for seeing a condemned film. For instance, a Catholic film reviewer is assigned to review for a secular paper. But what the perception generally was to go to a condemned film, even if it wasn't a sin, was at least an occasion of sin, because you had been advised that this was a spiritually dangerous film. And so you were placing yourself in the position of being exposed to an occasion of sin. And that's sort of where the outlook lay right up until the 1950s and 60s.